Well, this morning I'm going to talk to you about the table. And I quite like Christmas tables. It's one of my things that I really enjoy. And you might think, Julia, that's a bit of a weird thing to love a table. But if the humidity racks up later today, you are all going to be in love with your aircon units or your fans. You will appreciate those items of furniture and household things. But did you know now that the Christmas table has now become a thing? Gentlemen, you may not be so much aware of this, but ladies, if you've read any kind of Christmas magazine or you're on Pinterest or your eyes are open at all, somebody will have told you that the Christmas table now needs to be a thing. So I found some articles this week, and apparently now you need a killer centerpiece. Did you know this? For your Christmas table with native florals and fill plates with cinnamon and cloves. So hands up if we've all managed to do that. Yeah, me too. Oh, well done, Lisa. No. Don't lie in church. That's not... No, I've not done that either, because knowing my family, if I was to do that, some kind of sleepy relative would start nibbling on the cinnamon and cloves, thinking that they were kind of like a pre-dinner snack, but they're not, so I'm going to leave that one. And apparently your table now needs to be, and I quote with this, as on point as your menu. Did you know that? Your Christmas table, apparently that's what needs to happen. It's now something that we have to achieve. It's one more thing, usually for the ladies, that you have to do. It's a budget line that you kind of have to squeeze in. It has to look beautiful. It has to look amazing. Well, I don't know about you, but growing up thinking about my Christmases, I don't remember that. I don't remember looking to my mum and going, Mum, you've made a killer Christmas centerpiece this year. Congrats to you. Let's take a picture and stick it on Instagram. I don't remember doing that. What I remember is our regular dining table not being big enough to fit everybody round, and so you had to go and get the garden furniture. Does anybody remember that? Yeah, there we go. You went out and you got your rubbish white plastic garden furniture, or green if you were really posh, and you'd bring it in. And you'd get out maybe a special Christmas tablecloth that came out once a year that was crocheted by somebody 50 years ago, and you put it over your table, and then because you've got extra people around, you've not got enough chairs, am I right? So then you go on a scrounge around your house for all the chairs, and so some people are sitting on bar stools, like eating their Christmas dinner like this. Some people are on the reclining garden furniture, so they're kind of looking up at the table, trying to eat like that. That's what I remember about Christmas. Is anybody with me? There we go. And I don't remember commenting about centerpieces or the table looking super beautiful. What I remember is family. And I suspect that we weren't doing that because the aesthetics aren't really as important as what's actually happening around the table. You may have a wonderful table, but it's not really the furniture or the decoration that makes it. It's what's happening around your table. It's the gathering of friends and family. It's the sharing of some food, and we're going to do that later, let me tell you. It's the telling of stories and memories, and that's what makes the table pretty special for me. That's the power of the table. And we had the joy last year of going home for a Christmas. We had 5 hot Christmases, very hot Christmases, and so we got to go home for a Christmas, which was a bit of a shock to our systems because it was not hot. It was super, super, super cold. And our family all got together, and as is inevitable in our family, and probably yours as well, when you gather together, all the stories start being told, yes? All the, remember when this happened and all your important things. Well, my Christmas story that always gets told about me is an embarrassing one, just heads up. And it gets told every single year. And the first time Neil heard it, he just like, really? And so every year it gets told. And because we're family this morning, I'm going to tell you my embarrassing Christmas story because I love you and you love me. So we're going to get through this together. So apparently we were all off on holiday. I was maybe 4 or 5 on a Spanish holiday, and we must have been out for an evening meal because they eat a bit later in Spain. It's like 7, 8 o'clock at night. And there was a big bowl of sangria on the table, which is like an alcoholic drink, and it's got lots of fruit in it when it's traditionally prepared. And apparently the conversation wasn't as interesting to me as a 4 or 5-year-old, but the fruit was. I was maybe feeling a little bit peckish. So I started to dip my fingers into the sangria, and obviously my parents and the rest of my family were not paying attention at this point. So I'm dipping in and grabbing out the slices of fruit and having a look, because I quite liked fruit as a 4-year-old. And so I ate all the fruit, and then because I was a good girl, I put it back in the sangria bowl, all the peel, because I was a tidy little girl. And then when it got to the end of the conversation, people were like, oh, Julie's eaten all of the fruit soaked in sangria as a 4-year-old. So I remember nothing of that night, probably because I ate a whole fruit basket soaked in sangria, but that's the story that comes out every single year, and a few more which I will save for another Christmas. But I reckon that this kind of thing, not eating fruit bowls with sangria, but the coming together, the sharing of stories and memories, laughing and remembering and gathering around food is woven into the fabric of humanity. Almost every culture does it. They gather together, they share food, they talk, they laugh, they remember. And I think it's because all of us have a need for belonging. That's hardwired into us. We love sharing history and stories. We love gathering around food and special occasions. All over the world, people will be doing what you're going to do this afternoon. People have been traveling all across the world to get back to their family and spend it with people who they love. And it's not really anything new. The table and this kind of gathering was central in Bible times. You'll see that God very often, he instituted lots of feasts. He liked people getting together. And so he said, let's put lots of feasts in during the year so that you can gather together and you can come and you can remember and you can laugh and talk and the family gets together. And it was this time of extended family coming back. And you see it with Jesus. It's really normal to find Jesus in the eyewitness accounts of the Gospels to be eating. He's eating a lot, which I really like. I will follow Jesus' example on this. He gathers a lot with people and he eats with them. He sits at tables. And you'll see him eating with Pharisees, with friends, with foes, with people who are frowned upon. And for Jesus, it didn't really seem to matter whether somebody was the lowest of the low and an outcast in society, or whether they were the elite of the day and they would have had a blue tick next to their name in Instagram and thousands of followers. It didn't really matter for Jesus who they were. He was really comfortable to share a table with them. And that's important because tables at that time were all about sharing, and it was about affirming friendships and about kinship and goodwill and acknowledgement of status. So that's why when one of the stories in the Gospels is when Jesus invites himself actually to somebody's house, it's a really big deal because this person's a tax collector and is hated by his society. But Jesus saying, I'm going to come and eat with you is a big deal. It's saying, I'm going to honor you with my presence. And it's sometimes a commitment to non-violence, which is great. But there was also this other aspect of a meal, which we're going to look at today, called covenant meals. Can you say that with me? Covenant meals. And these were like gathering together, but a little bit more special, a bit more significant. And they happened when new relationships were being formed. That's why when people get married, often we have a meal, because a new relationship is being formed. Sometimes it happened for a reconciliation after a grievance, when something had happened perhaps between two tribes and they had decided to reconcile. They got together and they ate together. A celebration of new standing, where somebody is being elevated in the society. They'd come and have a covenant meal. And then this is what I love about covenant meals, is that if something bad has been happening, if there's been kind of bad feeling between two parties, when they come together and they eat the covenant meal, after that meal, nobody's allowed to bring it up again. It's as if the slate is wiped clean. And that's what we're going to come around in just a moment. We're going to come around a covenant meal. And the spirit of this meal and what it embodies is kind of summed up in this amazing story that I came across, which is of this guy called Zemia. And it's a modern day story. It actually happened, it's true. And he was an Israeli Christian, and he was driving through the West Bank, and a 13-year-old boy ran out in front of his car. And so he is swerving and he's like mashing the horn and trying to get this kid's attention, and the kid shows no sign of anything, and unfortunately Zemir hits this little boy and he kills him. And it's terrible and it's a tragedy, and he feels awful, as you would. And then he finds out that this boy belongs to an Arab family on the West Bank, on the other side where he's not allowed to go. And so he really wants to make reconciliation. He wants to go to this family as you would and just apologize and say, I'm so sorry that this happened. It wasn't my intention. Because they found out later that the boy was actually deaf. That's why he couldn't hear. He couldn't hear. He didn't see the way his face was with the angles. He didn't hear the horn. And so he stood no chance. And so he's trying to get in contact with the family, but really in the system that they have there, the family has the right to kill Zamir because he's killed their son by accident, but there's still a blood debt to be paid, if you will. And so he is trying to make amends and make restitution, but everyone's saying, don't do it. It's going to be so dangerous. They've got the right to kill you. They probably will kill you. Don't do it. But he finally finds this Arab pastor who says, I think I can make a way here. And he arranges this thing called a sulha, which is a reconciliation table, which I love that. And so what happens is they arrange to meet up together. So Zamir and the family, the entire family of the bereaved boy. And they sit down and the ceremony happens where Zamir comes with gifts and the family then refuse them, which is customary. And then it comes to the moment of truth where Zamir is sat there and the rest of the family there, and they're all watching the father who's lost his son. And if the father takes a sip of coffee or starts to eat, that's then the signal that he's forgiving Zamir and that they can move on together. And so it's a really tense moment where they're like, because at any point they could still kill him. So it's really risky what he's doing. And so they're watching and they're waiting, and it's a tense moment. And finally the father reaches for his coffee cup and takes a sip of the coffee cup. And this is what they said. This is a direct quote. So this is the father saying this to Zamir. Know, O my brother, that you are now in place of my son who has died. You have a family and a home elsewhere, but know that here is now your second home. You've become my son today. And isn't that incredible? Around this reconciliation table, that something that is so painful, so far gone you would think, and yet around a covenant meal is what was happening. This reconciliation table, that it can't ever be the same as it was. That there will never be that 13-year-old son again. It's not like, oh, well, that's okay now. But the reconciliation has been made. There's a way forward made. And that's the power of the table. That's the power of the communion table, the covenant table that we're going to come to. Is that we can be seen and fully known in all of our weaknesses, with all our wrongdoings, with all of our sin. We can be fully known and fully accepted at the same time by Jesus. Because he came as a baby, because he lived a sinless life, because he sacrificed himself for us. That's what the power of the table is this morning. There's a similar story that we're just going to very quickly look at in John 21. And just to give you a bit of context, if you're not familiar with this, Jesus has sat down at a covenant meal with his friends and said, I'm going to go to the cross, I'm going to die for you and for humanity. And they've shared bread together, they've shared a cup together. And then Jesus has gone, and Peter has seriously messed up. So Peter had all this bravado and said, I'm never going to deny you. I'm going to be there with you to the end. We're going to be through this thick and thin kind of thing. And then he messes up, and he messes up 3 times really badly. And he completely denies that he even knows Jesus, and he gets really passionate about it. And so Peter has completely failed, absolutely and utterly failed. And then what happens is Jesus raises from the dead, which is awesome. We celebrate that at Easter. And he's actually met with his disciples after that 2 times. And Jesus and Peter have not yet, that we know of, had a conversation about what Peter did. And then we get to this story, which is in John 21. It'll be up on the screen for you to read along with. It says, afterwards, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And it happened this way. Peter and Thomas, called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Peter told them. And they said, we'll go with you. So So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Now, that's really normal. So Peter was a fisherman before he was a disciple of Jesus. And so Peter's going back to what he knows. He's had this massive, massive failure in his life, and he's doing what we would all do, which is we return to the place where we last had success, which was fishing for Peter. It's what he knew, it's what he grew up with, it's what he was comfortable with, and so he's gone back there, and because he's a good leader, he's dragged his mates along with him, and they're all fishing, but not doing well. And then verse 4, early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. And he called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. I reckon I'd be quite cranky in that no. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some, which you would think is a silly thing to say if you're on the shore and talking to seasoned fishermen. So they were probably thinking, really? Do you know where the fish are? But it's Jesus, so he does. So they throw them on the other side of the boat. And then they were unable to haul the net because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John, who's writing this book, said to Peter, it's the Lord. And as soon as Peter heard him say, it's the Lord, he wrapped his outer garments around him, for he had taken it off. That's helpful to know. And jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat because they didn't want to get their clothes wet, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards, which doesn't sound far, but I've swam 100 yards and it is pretty far. I thought I was going to die at the time, but that's a story for another day. It was at Morton Island. It was quite a traumatic story. I'll tell you another time. It's a good story. Anyway, so there they are on the shore. And when they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. And Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have just caught, which I reckon categorically proves that Jesus has a little bit of Australian in him, because A, he's on the beach in the morning, B, he's got a barbecue breakfast going, and C, he's cooking fresh fish. So that for me, that's categoric proof. And so Simon Peter climbed aboard, dragged the net. It's full of large fish, but even with so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. And then it goes on to talk about the conversation that happens between Peter and Jesus. And as many times as Peter failed and denied Jesus, Jesus asked him, Peter, do you love me? And Peter's like, yeah, of course I love you. You know that I do. And it's this really interesting exchange where for every failure, Jesus then reinstates Peter. But what's happening in this moment is a covenant meal. He's gathered people together. They're sharing around food. They're talking about memories, and they're being fully known and fully loved in all of their weaknesses. And after this, they never talk about Peter's mess-ups again. You never see an account of Jesus going, it really was very silly what you did, Peter, and we should really talk around why you did that. Once this occasion happens, it seems to be forgotten. It seems to never be brought up again. And after all of Peter's mistakes, after all of his bad attitudes, after all of his character flaws and his fears and his doubts and his experience, his very lowest point in his life, and exposed to the utter weakness of who he is, that he thought he was going to be with Jesus and he totally blew it. Jesus cooks him a meal, gathers friends, they share stories and memories, and then he's invited to take a next step with Jesus in spite of all that's happened. There's a world-famous research author called Brené Brown, and she says this: connection is the energy that's created between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, where they can give and receive without judgment. And that's what we've got this morning. That's what these tables represent. Because of what Jesus did, because he came as a baby that we remember today, but he didn't stay a baby. The table that we're going to gather around, these covenant meals, it's a time to come. It's a time to share stories. It's a time to be fully known and loved in all of our weaknesses. Our weaknesses and our sins make no difference at this table because of Jesus.